Hey, it's Nathan. Before we start tonight's story, I want you to think about something. We assume the most dangerous moment in a dangerous man's life is when he pulls a trigger. It isn't. The most dangerous moment is when he chooses not to. Tonight I'm telling you about a Marine Scout Sniper who spent 24 years learning distance, wind, and patience, and who came home in dress blues to bury his 16-year-old son. The sheriff told him it was an accident. The case was closed in 4 hours. And then, standing at the grave, his 10-year-old daughter slipped her hand into his and whispered 9 words that turned a funeral into a battlefield. Here's what I find fascinating about this one. Everybody in that county was waiting for the rifle. They knew what he was. They boarded up their guilt and waited for a loud, angry man to give them an excuse. Instead, they got something worse. They got a quiet man with a notebook, a wristwatch, and nothing left to lose, who treated their whole family like a target package. Stay to the end, because the last thing his son left behind is the part I still think about at night. Let's get into it. The message reached Master Gunnery Sergeant Virgil Sheppard at a dust-colored outpost 11 time zones from Nebraska, and it was 4 sentences long. Your son Gabe died Tuesday evening. He fell from the roof of the barn at your father-in-law's place. The funeral is Saturday. Come home. Virgil read it 3 times, standing very still in the doorway of the operations tent, and the 2 Marines watching him said later that his face never changed at all. That was the thing people always said about Virgil Sheppard. His face never changed. He had spent 24 years as a Marine Scout Sniper, and the job had planed him down the way a river planes down a stone, until everything unnecessary was gone, and what remained was smooth and heavy and hard to read. He was 46 years old. He had 61 confirmed kills, a number he never said out loud, and a rule he repeated to every young shooter he ever trained. The loud man is advertising. The quiet man is working. His commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Paz, signed the emergency leave himself and drove Virgil to the airfield, and the last thing Paz said to him was careful, chosen, and useless. Whatever you find at home, guns, come back from it. Virgil flew for 31 hours. He did not sleep. He sat upright with his hands flat on his knees and watched the little airplane on the seatback screen crawl across an ocean. And he did what snipers do when the world goes sideways. He built a range card in his head. Known facts, unknown facts. Terrain, his son was dead. That was a known fact, and it sat on his chest like a vehicle. Everything else was unknown, and the terrain was a place called Brayton, Nebraska. Population 2,100. In a county his wife's family had owned, in every way that mattered for 3 generations. Virgil had met Jolene Bodine 20 years earlier at a rodeo dance in Broken Bow, when she was the prettiest girl in 3 counties, and he was a lance corporal with a high and tight and 1 deployment behind him. Her family had never wanted him. Her father, Wyman Bodine, ran the Bodine Livestock Auction, the biggest sale barn in that corner of the state, and Wyman measured men by acres and head of cattle, not by medals. Her uncle Lamar wore the sheriff's star, and had worn it so long that most people in Antler County could not name a time before it. Her brother Rowdy ran the pens and the trucks at the auction yard, a wide, grinning man who broke things at weddings and got away with it, because in Antler County, a Bodine getting away with it was the weather. It rained, it snowed, and the Bodines got away with it. Virgil had married Jolene anyway, because you cannot shoot your way out of being 26 and in love, and for a while it had even worked. 2 kids. Gabe, born serious, and Lottie, born laughing, 4 years apart. A little place outside Brayton with a windmill and a machine shed that Virgil rebuilt one leave at a time. But 20 years of deployments is a slow divorce even when nobody files, and every time Virgil came home, the Bodines had grown a little further into his house, like tree roots into a foundation. It was Wyman who bought Gabe his first 4-wheeler. It was Rowdy who taught the boy to back a stock trailer. It was Lamar who put Gabe's picture in the paper when he won the county fair. And it was all 3 of them, standing shoulder to shoulder in Virgil's own gravel driveway on a gray Thursday afternoon, when the taxi from the Omaha airport dropped him at his front gate with a sea bag on his shoulder and his son 4 days dead. Wyman spoke first. "Son," he said, though he had never once called Virgil that in 20 years. "It's a terrible thing. A terrible, terrible thing." Lamar stepped forward with the manila folder already in his hand, like a man serving papers. And Virgil noticed that before anything else. The folder, ready, waiting for him. Boy was up on the barn roof after supper. Fixing tin before the storm, Lamar said. Best we can figure, he lost his footing on the wet pitch, come down on the concrete apron by the grain door. Doc Purley looked at him that night. Blunt trauma, consistent with a fall. I closed it out myself, Virgil. Didn't want the family dragged through an inquest. It was an accident, plain and awful, and I am so sorry. Virgil stood in his own driveway and listened to the sheriff of Antler County explain his son's death in the past tense. Complete, stapled, closed, and something old and cold in the back of his skull, the thing that had kept him alive on 11 deployments, made one small note and filed it away. 4 hours. His boy had hit the ground at 7 in the evening, and by 11 that same night, Lamar Bodine had signed the paperwork and closed the case. Virgil had waited 9 days on a rooftop in Ramadi to confirm one man's pattern of life. 4 hours was not an investigation. 4 hours was a burial before the burial. He said none of this. He shook Lamar's hand, and he watched his own hand do it like it belonged to someone else. He said thank you for looking after things. He said I'd like to see my wife now. And their faces relaxed, all three of them, some tiny letting out of air, and the cold thing in the back of Virgil's skull made its second note of the afternoon, because he had spent half his life watching men through glass at 800 meters, learning what bodies say when mouths are lying. Relief. He had said the harmless thing, and 3 grown men had sagged a 1/4 inch with relief. Inside the house, Jolene was at the kitchen table with her mother, Twyla, and a casserole she wasn't eating. And when she stood up to hold him, she cried hard enough to shake, and Virgil held his wife of 20 years and stared over her shoulder at the wall calendar, where the square for Tuesday, the day his son died, had been wiped clean with something wet. The pen strokes underneath had ghosted into the paper. There had been writing there. Someone had scrubbed it off. He closed his eyes, kissed his wife's hair, and started counting the hours until Saturday, the way he used to count down to a stalk. He did not know yet what had been on that calendar square. He only knew that in his trade, when the ground has been swept, it is because someone walked across it. They buried Gabriel Wyman Sheppard on Saturday morning under a sky the color of gun steel in the Bodine plot at Cedarvale Cemetery, which told its own quiet story, because Virgil had a family plot too, 2 counties over, and nobody had asked him. Half of Antler County came. The auction was dark for the day, out of respect, and the respect was the loud kind. Wyman stood at the head of the grave like a governor at a ribbon cutting, gray Stetson over his heart, accepting condolences with both hands. Rowdy wore a suit that fit him like a tarp on a bull and kept his sunglasses on. Sheriff Lamar directed traffic on the cemetery road personally, hazard lights turning, hat brim low, the very picture of a county in mourning, and Deputy Virgil Bodine, Lamar's nephew and the man who had written the 4-hour report, stood at parade rest by the gate. Virgil catalogued all of it from behind his own unmoving face. He was in dress blues, 24 years of ribbons on his chest, and his dead son's initials inked inside his left wrist since Wednesday. The pastor said Gabe was a good boy, and for once a funeral sentence was simply true. Gabe Sheppard had been the kind of 16-year-old that small towns are supposed to produce and mostly don't. Quiet like his father, careful like his father. He raised a heifer for FFA and kept a spiral notebook on her weight gain like a scientist. He ran trail cameras up and down the shelter belts and the river breaks, $40 at a time out of his own pocket, because he wanted to be a wildlife biologist, and his bedroom wall was covered in grainy night photographs of coyotes and bobcats, and one smeared shape he swore to Lottie was a mountain lion. He had a dog named Scout that slept across his feet, and a little sister he never once called a pest, and in 14 months, he would have had a driver's license and in 22 months a diploma. And none of that was going to happen now, because of a wet roof, the county said, and 18 feet of empty air. Virgil stood at the edge of the hole in the ground and did the arithmetic he could not stop doing. The barn at Wyman's place ran east and west. The grain door was on the north face. He had re-roofed that barn himself the summer Gabe was 8, and he knew its pitch the way he knew the trigger weight of every rifle he'd ever carried. And the pitch was shallow, a working barn's pitch, built so a man could walk it. And Gabe had walked it, dozens of times, in boots Virgil had bought him, because a boy raised around machinery by a father like Virgil did not get on a roof in the rain without being sent there. Who sent him? Nobody had said. The report didn't say. The report said found unresponsive on the concrete apron at approximately 1900 hours by family. Found by family. Which family? The pastor said amen. The crowd began its slow, murmuring dissolve toward the cars, hands on Virgil's shoulder, one after another. Sorry for your loss. Sorry for your loss. Anything you need. And Virgil stood fast at the grave's edge with his cover in his hands and let the county flow past him like water around a post. That was when he felt it. A small hand slid into his. Lottie, 10 years old, in a black dress with a white collar, her mother's coloring and her father's stillness, and she had not cried once all morning, which he had noticed, because noticing was the only thing he knew how to do with his grief. She stood beside him looking down at the casket, at the first shovelful of earth, and she squeezed his fingers once, hard, like a radio click, and then his daughter tilted her face up to him and whispered, so softly he felt it more than heard it, "Daddy." He was already dead before he fell. I was watching from the hayloft. The wind moved across Cedarvale Cemetery. The backhoe idled. Somewhere behind them, Wyman Bodine laughed his soft, consoling laugh at something a banker said, and Sheriff Lamar's cruiser lights went around and around, red, blue, red, painting the wet grass. Virgil Sheppard did not move. He did not blink. He did not turn his head toward his daughter, because a sniper's first discipline is that observation must never be observed, and every instinct he owned had just gone off at once, telling him that this cemetery was not a cemetery anymore. It was open ground, and his daughter had just spoken over an open channel, and he did not yet know who was listening. He looked down the hill at the trucks, at Rowdy leaning on a fender with his sunglasses aimed their way, at Verl by the gate writing something small in a small book, and 61 memories rose in him with one voice, and the voice said what it always said, "You know how to end this. You have always known how to end this." Lottie's hand was still in his, cold as creek water. He closed his fingers around it, gently, the way you close a hand around something that must not be dropped, and he leaned down as if to comfort a crying child, his lips at her ear, and said 4 words in the calmest voice she would ever hear from him. Not here, not yet. And Lottie, 10 years old, God bless her forever, did the bravest thing anyone in this story will do. She nodded like he'd said something about sandwiches, wiped her dry eyes for the watchers, and walked with her father down the hill, past her grinning uncle, past the deputy with his little book, holding the hand of the deadliest man in Nebraska, both of them performing grief's ordinary shuffle, while the ground shifted under an entire county, and nobody knew it yet. You need to understand what the Bodines were, because outsiders never did. Drive through Antler County and you'd see a tidy courthouse square, a co-op elevator, a Lutheran church with a good roof, and the Bodine livestock auction sitting on the east edge of Brayton like a courthouse of its own. Pens and alleys and a sale ring under a steel barn the size of an aircraft hangar. Lot flags snapping. The marquee reading, "Sale every Saturday, God bless the American rancher." Every Saturday, 800 to 2,000 head moved through that ring. Trucks came down from the Dakotas and up from Kansas, and the auctioneer's chant poured out of the loudspeakers like an engine that never missed, and Wyman Bodine stood at the ring rail in his gray Stetson, taking a commission on every animal that walked past him, the way his father had, and his fathers before that. The sale barn was the county's heart, bank, and church rolled into one, and the Bodines held all 3 offices. Wyman ran the money. Lamar ran the law, Rowdy ran the muscle, the pens, the trucks, and the 8 or 10 hard-handed men who came and went on the yard payroll. And Verl, mild, note-taking Verl, ran the paperwork in both directions, a deputy's cruiser by day and the auction's books by night, family in the exact way that made everything smooth. Jolene had grown up inside that machine, a Bodine princess in the sale barn cafe, and if Virgil was honest with himself, which was the only way he knew how to be, the machine was half of why she'd married him. He was the one thing in 3 counties her father didn't own. For 20 years, she had lived stretched between the two, wife to a ghost who came home 4 months a year, daughter to a kingdom that was always right there, warm and humming, and every deployment pulled her one field closer to her family. Until Virgil would come home and find his children's lives fully scheduled by Bodines, and his wife saying, "Honey, they're just helping," and the truth is he had let it happen, because a man who is gone cannot also steer, and that particular arithmetic was the one wound he could not blame on anyone else. Now he moved through his own house in the days after the funeral like what he was, a reconnaissance element behind friendly lines that had stopped being friendly, and he watched his wife. He hated it, and he did it anyway. Jolene's grief was real. That was the terrible thing. She cried in her sleep. She stood in Gabe's doorway at 2 a.m. with her hand on the light switch, not turning it on. But laid over the top of her grief was something else, something that ran on rails, and his trade had taught him its name. Management. Her family called 4 times a day, and she took the calls in the yard. When Virgil said he wanted to see where it happened, she had reasons ready, prepared reasons. The barn's a working barn. Daddy's got cattle in the lot. Don't do that to yourself. When he asked, gently, at the sink, her hands in dishwater, what Gabe had been doing on the roof in the first place, who had asked him to be up there, Jolene went still for exactly 1 second. 1 second Virgil clocked like a rangefinder, and then said Daddy needed the tin fixed before the storm, and Gabe offered, you know how he was, and that sentence was smooth on top and wrong underneath, because Virgil did know how his son was. Gabe didn't offer around Wyman. Gabe had been going quiet around the Bodines for a year. It was in the boys' texts, which Virgil reread every night in the machine shed, 11 time zones of texts, and you could watch it happen like weather on a radar loop. In the spring, paragraphs about the heifer and the trail cams. By June, one-word answers. In his last month, Gabe had sent exactly one long message, and Virgil now knew it by heart. Dad, when you get home, can we talk? Not on the phone. It's about the yard. I want to ask you what to do, because you always know what to do. Don't say anything to Mom yet. Virgil had been on a hillside with a radio blackout in effect when it landed. He had answered 6 days later, 2 words, coming home soon. The boy had replied with a thumbs up, and 5 weeks after that, he was dead on the concrete by the grain door, and his father would spend the rest of his life knowing the exact size of the gap between "can we talk" and "coming home soon." So, the yard. Something at the yard. Virgil sat in the machine shed at night with Scout's head on his boot, a single trouble light burning, and built the target package the way he'd built 100 others. Patient, indifferent, complete, known. Gabe had seen something at the auction yard that scared him. Known. Gabe was dead before he fell, per the only witness with no reason to lie. Age 10. Known. The sheriff had shut the case in 4 hours. The deputy who wrote the report kept the auction's books, and the coroner, Doc Purley, was 79 years old and had signed whatever Lamar put in front of him since the Carter administration. Known. The calendar square for the day of Gabe's death had been washed clean by somebody in his own kitchen. Assessment. His son's death was a family operation, and his family was inside the wire of the other family, and the 2 women he loved most were sleeping 30 feet from him in that farmhouse. One of them a witness, one of them a question mark. Both of them hostages, whether anybody used the word or not. Any loud move, any move at all that the Bodines could see, and he was 1 custody filing, 1 CPS call from a friendly judge, 1 accident on a wet county road away from losing Lottie too. 61 times in his life, the solution to a problem had weighed 170 grains and traveled at 2,800 feet per second, and every cell in his body was screaming for number 62. Instead, he opened Gabe's spiral notebook, the heifer notebook, which he had taken from the boy's room before anyone thought to, and he turned past the weigh-ins to the back pages, because his son was his son, and his son documented things. And there, in a 16-year-old's careful mechanical pencil, was a hand-drawn map of Antler County's river breaks, with 12 small triangles marked along the shelter belts and draws. Trail cameras. Each triangle had a number and a date. 11 of them Virgil found over the following week, walking fence lines at dawn with a fencing pliers in his hand as cover. Each camera exactly where the map said, cards full of coyotes and raccoons, and 1 genuinely smeared maybe lion, and he took every card and replaced every camera, because that is what careful looks like. The 12th triangle was different. It sat on the bluff above the county road, southwest of the auction yard, with a clean line of sight to the back lots, the truck wash, and the north gate, the gate the public never used. Next to it, Gabe had written 1 word and boxed it twice. Moved. The camera on the bluff was gone. Not fallen, not stolen by a hunter who would have taken the strap and left the screws. Unscrewed, strap and all, the mounting bracket taken out of the tree, the bark scarred white where somebody without a 16-year-old's patience had pried it loose. Virgil stood on that bluff at first light, with his son's map in his pocket, looking down the exact sight line his son had chosen, at the back gate of his father-in-law's kingdom, and felt the whole shape of it turn beneath him like a floor becoming a wall. Gabe hadn't stumbled into anything. Gabe had been watching the yard. On purpose. For months, his boy had been running his own surveillance operation on the Bodine livestock auction, and the Bodines had found one of his cameras, and 11 days later the boy was dead on the concrete, and the case was closed before his blood dried. The question was no longer what happened. The question was, what did the camera see? And the answer, though Virgil did not know it yet, was sitting 20 feet from where he slept, hidden by a dead boy in the one place in Nebraska only his father would ever look. Whoever had pried Gabe's camera off that tree had made the mistake people always made about the boy, the same mistake they were now making about his father. They thought quiet meant simple. They took the camera on the bluff and, Virgil had to assume, the card inside it, and they believed that was the end of it, because they could not imagine a 16-year-old running his operation with backup media and a fallback cache. But Virgil had raised this particular 16-year-old on war stories that were really tradecraft lessons with the serial numbers filed off. Always know your egress, always assume your primary is blown, never keep the thing and the record of the thing in the same place. So while Antler County watched the grieving Marine mow his lawn and fix his windmill and shake hands after church like a man slowly going soft with sorrow, the grieving Marine took his son's bedroom apart 1 cubic inch at a time, nights, penlight, gloves, everything photographed and returned to its place, and found the first breadcrumb taped inside the battery door of a busted handheld game console in a shoebox of busted electronics, exactly where a smart kid stashes something. In the one drawer adults never open because it is officially junk. A micro SD card. On it, a single video file and a single text file. The video was 40 seconds of the auction yard's north lots at 2:41 in the morning. Filmed from the bluff camera, black and white in infrared, timestamp burning in the corner, and it showed a cattle pot back to the unloading chute, and men moving maybe 60 head off the truck by handheld light, no dome lights, no yard lights, and a figure at the chute gate with a long-handled applicator running something over each animal's hip as it passed, hide paint, and another figure at a tailgate with a clipboard, and the gate of the clipboard man, the wide, rolling tarp suit gate, was Rowdy Bodine's, and Virgil had known that walk for 20 years. The text file said, in his son's flat typing, this happens every second and fourth Tuesday, 12 total so far. Brands don't match the papers. I checked the hip numbers against the Saturday sale sheets that Virl leaves in the cafe, the same cattle sell twice. And then, the sentence that stopped Virgil's breath in his chest. I think Mr. Seeley knows too. He parked on the Bluff Road last month with binoculars. I saw him on camera 7. Hobie Seeley. Virgil had to sit down on his son's bed in the dark with that name. Hobart Seeley was the brand inspector, the Nebraska Brand Committee's man for that district. A dry, fair, tireless little bald man who had checked brands and papers at the Bodine sale barn for 30 years, and who had, the county understood, retired suddenly back in the spring and moved to Arizona for his lungs. There had been a cake, Wyman had given a speech, and now Virgil was holding a dead boy's SD card that put Seeley on the Bluff Road with binoculars pointed at the Bodine back gate, a few weeks before the county stopped seeing him, and the arithmetic Virgil did next was not the kind you write down. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the machine shed with the trouble light off, all the way dark, Scout against his leg, and worked the problem like a fire mission. What Gabe knew. The Bodine livestock auction was laundering stolen cattle. Trucks moved rustled or ghost-papered stock in off the interstate corridors at night. The crew remarked them. Virl's paperwork gave them a history, and they sold clean on Saturday under the chant and the flags, and in a trade where a single fat steer brought $2,000 and nobody counts to 60 in the dark. That was a quiet river of money running under the county's church-going heart, and it had been running for years. What Gabe knew got him killed, not because he was a threat in himself, a kid with a hobby camera, But because of what his camera had already swallowed the night Hobie Seeley stopped being a problem for the Bodines, and here Virgil made himself think it in plain words. Seeley did not move to Arizona. Seeley came to the yard one night with his binoculars and his lawful questions, and the Bodines closed his case too, and my son's camera was on the bluff, aimed at the north gate, on a timer, every second and fourth Tuesday, and they figured that out 11 days before he died. That was what the missing 12th camera meant. That was what the wet roof meant, and the 4 hours, and the washed calendar square, which Virgil now understood had said what Jolene could never let him read, in her own handwriting, something as small and damning as Gabe to Daddy's. 4 p.m. They had summoned the boy, to ask him, or scare him, or buy him. Boys like Gabe don't scare and don't sell. And at some point on that gray Tuesday evening, in the barn where Virgil had taught him to drive nails, somebody had hit his son too hard, in the head, with something that would read as concrete, and the family had gathered around its own violence the way it always had, and Lamar had brought the folder, and up the ladder in the rain went the last worst lie, and down came Gabriel Wyman Sheppard, already gone, onto the apron by the grain door, arranged, found unresponsive by family. Virgil breathed in the dark, 4 counts in, 4 counts hold, 4 counts out, the way he had breathed on 61 rooftops and hillsides and water towers, and understood with total clarity why his hands were steady. He was on glass now. This was the work. And the work said, you do not shoot the first target you see. You find the whole network first. And the work also said something else, something he had repeated to snipers in training until they hated him. Fired is final. You can wait longer, you can stalk closer, you can choose again tomorrow, but fired is final. And a target package this size, a sheriff, a patriarch, an enforcer, a deputy, a bot coroner, a county, could not be solved at 2,800 feet per second, because a bullet only closes one case, and the Bodines had taught him personally how fast a closed case can be built over a body in Antler County. 4 hours. They would do it to him, and then to the only witness, who was 10, and slept down the hall from a Bodine, so he chose the other rifle. In the morning he drove 90 miles to a big box store in Grand Island, paid cash for a burner phone, and from the parking lot called a number he had not dialed in 6 years, and a voice answered on the second ring the way it had answered on radios on 3 continents. Go for Treadway. Cash Treadway had lain behind Virgil Sheppard for 9 years as his spotter, had done their 61 kills worth of math, wind calls and ranges and comebacks, had left the Corps a decade back, gone to law school on the GI Bill of all the unlikely endings, and was now Special Agent Cash Treadway, FBI, Omaha Field Office, Violent Crimes and, lately, a task force with a name so boring it was almost camouflage, the Rural and Agricultural Crimes Working Group. He did not say the word revenge, and he did not raise his voice. He laid out the target package, the video, the notebook, the Tuesdays, Seeley, the 4-hour case, the Hayloft, and when he finished, there was a silence on the line, exactly as long as the silences Cash used to leave before calling a wind he wasn't sure of. And then his old spotter said, "Guns, I will take this, and I will run it as far and as fast as the law allows. But I need you to hear me say the next part. You are the husband of a Bodine, living in Bodine country, and the moment they feel pressure, they will look at you, and at the girl. So you have one job, and it is the hardest job I have ever asked you to do. Be slow, be sad, be nobody. Can you do that?" And Virgil Sheppard looked out the windshield at a parking lot in Grand Island, Nebraska, at ordinary families loading ordinary groceries into ordinary trucks, all of them living in the country his son should have grown old in, and said the sentence that would cost him the most and win him everything. "Cash, I've waited 9 days for one man. For my son, I can wait forever." What followed was the strangest deployment of Virgil Sheppard's life. 5 weeks in his own house, behind his own face, wearing his own grief as a ghillie suit. He let the county see exactly what it expected. A big quiet man raking leaves, a veteran nodding along at the co-op counter, a husband sitting beside his wife in the third pew, sharing a hymnal with the family that had killed his son. 61 times he had learned that the stalk is the mission, and he stalked now, in plain sight, and the discipline it took made Ramadi feel like rest, because everything in that house had teeth. Jolene's mother came on Sundays and dried dishes with the calm of a woman whose family had never once been punished for anything, and asked Virgil kind questions about his retirement plans with eyes that were doing inventory. Rowdy took to stopping by with firewood nobody needed, standing in the yard a beat too long, reading the house the way Muscle reads a room. And once, only once, Sheriff Lamar himself eased the cruiser up the drive at dusk, rolled the window down, and said, "Brother to brother, you know, some men, after a loss like yours, they get to chewing on things, get to seeing shapes in the dark, and it eats them alive. And I'd hate that for you, Virgil. I truly would." And Virgil leaned on the fence rail with the sun going down behind him, and gave the sheriff of Antler County a slow, sad country nod and said, "No shapes here, Lamar. I'm just tired," and watched relief loosen the man's jaw for the second time, and filed it, and went inside, and wrote down the exact time of the threat for the record he was keeping of everything. Because that was Virgil's war now, the record. Cash had been precise. The video alone is a start, not a case. Get me the pattern and I'll get the warrants. So the sniper went to work at the only range that mattered, close. The second and fourth Tuesdays came, and Virgil was not so foolish as to go near the bluff, which they had found once and might watch. But a man who has spent 24 years selecting final firing positions does not need the obvious hill. He lay in the dry irrigation cut a mile east with a thermal spotting scope wrapped in burlap, a position he had chosen off a soil map, and he counted trucks and logged plates and timed the gate, 237, 244, 251, and mailed the memory cards to a post office box in Omaha with no note. Because Cash didn't need notes. Cash needed data, and data is what spotters live on. He photographed Virgil's cruiser parked behind the auction office at midnight on paperwork nights. He got the cafe's Saturday sale sheets, just a proud, grieving grandpa's habit, Wyman thought, watching Virgil collect programs, and Gabe's hip number trick held, the same cattle selling twice, and Ina Blevins, the auction's bookkeeper for 30 years, a small, stiff woman with a smoker's voice who had wept at Gabe's funeral harder than family, began finding reasons to talk to Virgil at the post office. And on the third occasion, she pressed a church bulletin into his hand and said, "You drop this." And inside the bulletin was a folded photocopy of a scale ticket. And on the ticket 2 weights for the same lot number, an honest weight and a Saturday weight. And in the margin, in a small, stiff hand, the words, "There are years of these, and he made me keep them off the books, and I kept them anyway. Every one. Tell your man to subpoena the blue cabinet. Hobie was my friend. Tell your man." Virgil stood at the counter of the Brayton post office holding a church bulletin, understanding that he was not the only person in Antler County who had been waiting, that a county is never actually owned, only occupied, and that occupied territory is always full of quiet people keeping records. It broke him open a little, that bulletin. It was the first time since the cemetery that he had felt anything move in his chest besides the cold. And it came at the exact moment the cold was being tested worst. Because 5 weeks is long, and the Bodines were not statues. They were predators with a nose for weather, and the weather was changing on them in ways they could smell but not see. A stock trailer with South Dakota plates got pulled over on Highway 91 by a state trooper who did not wave at Lamar's name, and the driver made bail from Sioux Falls, not from Brayton. A man in a gimme cap nobody knew spent 2 Saturdays at the sale ring, buying nothing, chewing a toothpick, watching the loadout alleys. Wyman's banker friend in Norfolk mentioned, golfing, that somebody had been asking the brand committee for district inspection archives. Little tremors, each one deniable, and Virgil watched the family's body language tighten week by week from his pew and his fence line. Watched Rowdy start walking the yard's perimeter at night with a light. Watched Virgil's cruiser sit longer and longer in the dark by the north gate. And he knew, the way you know downrange, that the window was beginning to move. Cornered things bite. And then one night in the 5th week, Virgil came in from the shed at 11 and found Jolene sitting at the kitchen table with the lights off, his coat across her lap, and her hands inside the lining pocket where the burner phone lived. And the phone was in her hands, and her face, when the yard light caught it, was not angry, it was terrified, and she said, in a whisper that had their whole marriage inside it, "Virgil, what did you do?" And from the hallway shadow, in pajamas, holding the dog. Their daughter answered before he could, with a cold, clear 10-year-old fury that neither parent would ever forget. He didn't do anything, Mama. That's what you're scared of. You know what your family did. I saw them. The kitchen stayed silent for a long time after Lottie said it. Scout's tail moved once against the floor, uncertain, and the yard light hummed, and Jolene Sheppard sat with her dead son's father's burner phone in her hands and her living daughter's eyes on her face. And Virgil watched his wife arrive, finally, at the intersection she had spent 5 weeks driving around. He would learn the whole of it later, in a proffer room in Omaha with lawyers present, but the shape of it he understood right there in the dark kitchen. Jolene had not known. That Tuesday she had written Gabe to Daddy's, 4 p.m. on the calendar, because Wyman asked her to send the boy over, just to talk sense into him about respecting the family's business. That's all. And she had believed, because believing was the family religion. And when the call came at 7, she had driven to the barn and been met in the yard by her uncle, already there, already sheriff-voiced, already managing, and she had let herself be managed, because the alternative was a thought she could not survive thinking. He fell, honey, he fell. And she had scrubbed the calendar square herself the next morning, telling herself it was grief, so nobody gets confused, and that scrubbing was the exact size of what she knew and refused to know. And she had lived 5 weeks inside that refusal with her son in the ground. And now her daughter was standing in the hallway saying, I saw them, and there was no room left in the house for the religion. Virgil sat down across from his wife. He did not reach for the phone. He said, very quietly, ask me. And Jolene asked the question she had been strangling since the funeral. Not what did you do, but the real one. Was he dead when they put him on the roof? And Virgil said yes. And his wife made a sound he had only ever heard once before, on a road outside Fallujah, from a mother, and it is not a sound that belongs in a farm kitchen in Nebraska. And when it finally stopped, she was someone slightly different than she had been, the way ground is different after an earthquake. And the first thing the different Jolene did was turn to the hallway and open her arms. And the second thing she did, with her daughter's face buried against her, was look at her husband over Lottie's head and say, in a Bodine voice, flat and operational, one of theirs after all but at last on the right side of it, tell me what you need me to do. What he needed, it turned out, was the one thing only she could give. Testimony had begun to gather, Cash's tremors becoming a hum, the blue cabinet's existence known, plates and Tuesdays and double-sold lots stacking up in a federal building in Omaha, but everything still orbited one hole at the center, Hobie Seeley, because cattle papers make a racketeering case, and a missing brand inspector makes a murder case, and without Seeley, the Bodine's lawyers could drown the paper in reasonable doubt for years. There had never been a body. There had been a cake and a speech and a forwarding address in Yuma that answered no mail, and Seeley had no family but a sister in a home in Kearney with a memory like wet paper. Somewhere in Antler County's 1,000 square miles of draws and shelter belts and dry wells was a dry, fair, tireless little man who had asked one question too many, and only the family knew where. And here is where Jolene Bodine Sheppard, sail barn princess, went to war for her son. Because Virgil had cameras and Cash had subpoenas, but Jolene had something better. She had the family's own grammar. She knew that Wyman told Twyla nothing and Rowdy everything. She knew Rowdy could not carry weight alone, never had, that whatever Rowdy did sat on him like wet grain and had to be vented somewhere. She knew about the deer camp on the Calamus, the family's church of last resort where the men went when a thing needed drinking about, and she knew her brother had gone there alone, twice, back in the spring, in the exact window when Hobie Seeley stopped being seen, and that Rowdy, who had shot every deer of his life from the east stand, had both times been vague and directionless about where he had been sitting. Brothers tell sisters strange half-things at low moments. At Gabe's funeral lunch, Rowdy, 4 beers down, had gripped Jolene's wrist in the church basement and said, wet-eyed, out of nowhere, you know none of this was supposed to touch the kids. Joe, I'd have gone to the wall before I let anything touch the kids. And she had comforted him. Comforted him. She reported all of this at the kitchen table in the same flat voice, watching her own hands, and Virgil took the terrain of it the way he took any terrain, and saw the line as clean as a bullet's arc. The east stand, A man who has to drink at a place is a man who buried something at it. And a man who abandons a stand he's hunted for 30 years is a man who cannot look at what it overlooks. Virgil called the number. 2 nights later, under a working moon, Special Agent Cash Treadway and a forensic team out of Omaha came quietly up the Calamus with a cadaver dog named Juniper and a ground-penetrating radar cart, guided by a hand-drawn map, this one drawn by the father, not the son, and at 3:40 in the morning, in the soft ground of a washout 90 yards northwest of the East Deer Stand, under 18 inches of Nebraska, they found Hobart Seeley, still in his brand committee jacket, his binoculars folded on his chest, which detail, the coroner's people said, meant somebody had arranged him, and Virgil, standing at the tape line in the dark where Cash let him stand, understood that Rowdy had buried the little man gently and felt no mercy about it whatsoever, only a range card updating. Confirmed. The hole at the center of the case had a name and a jacket and a gunshot wound, and the last free advantage the Bodine family possessed, doubt, went into an evidence bag on the banks of the Calamus River at 4 in the morning, and the sun that came up over Antler County that day rose on a kingdom that was already over and did not know it, run by men drinking coffee and reading cattle prices. 11 days from the morning the county would come to take them, and the only person in Brayton who knew both of those facts drove home from the river, parked by his machine shed, let his son's dog out, and stood in his yard watching the light come up the windmill, doing the thing his whole life had trained him to do, and his whole soul had never once managed at a moment like this. Nothing. Nothing lasted 9 more days, and then the Bodines, who had survived 3 generations by smelling rain before the glass dropped, finally did what cornered things do, and it is the reason this story ends the way it ends. The tremors had become undeniable. The brand committee had gone unreachable. Verl's contact at the courthouse whispered that a grand jury was impaneled in Omaha, subject unknown. And on the 9th day, Ina Blevins did not come to work, because Cash had quietly moved her and her blue cabinet to a residence inn in Lincoln with 2 marshals, and her absence went through the auction office like a fire alarm, and that night the family gathered at Wyman's, trucks nose out in the yard, and made its last plan. Virgil knew the meeting happened because he watched it happen, from the irrigation cut, on thermal, 5 warm bodies in Wyman's kitchen, until 2 in the morning. What he could not hear, the wire heard. Because the FBI had a wire in Wyman Bodine's kitchen by then, and the affidavit that put it there had Virgil's Tuesdays and Ina's tickets and a dead man's binoculars in it, and on that wire, in the small hours, the United States recorded the following family business. Wyman, telling Verrill to burn the annex ledgers and lose the Northgate's camera server in the river. Lamar, saying he could not sit on the state boys much longer, and that the family's problem had a name, and the name was not the FBI. The name was the husband, because federal cases are built out of somebody local, and there's only one somebody it could be. And then Rowdy, drunk, unraveling, saying the sentence that would be played one day in a federal courtroom to a silent jury. I'm not doing another kid, Daddy. I'll do the Marine. I'll do him tonight. But I'm not doing another kid. The girl's 10. I still see the boy's face. I'm not doing it. Another kid. The girl. On the recording, nobody in that kitchen says what. Nobody says, "Are you insane?" Wyman Bodine's voice, the grandfather of the children under discussion, says only, "Gravel calm. Nobody's doing anything tonight. We're not animals. We do it clean or not at all." And that sentence, "we do it clean," would eventually be worth 20 years all by itself. And Special Agent Cash Treadway, listening live from a van outside Norfolk, made 2 phone calls before 3 a.m. The first was to the U.S. Attorney, and it moved the takedown from 11 days out to now. The second was to a burner phone in a machine shed, and it was 4 words long. The old words, from the old work, spotter to shooter. The words that meant threat confirmed, act, guns. They're coming tonight. What the Bodine family decided, after Wyman's not tonight, was tomorrow. And not a bullet, because a shot Marine makes headlines. A fire. The farmhouse wiring was old. The county fire marshal answered to Lamar. And a family asleep is a family asleep. And if that sentence has just stopped your breath, hold on to it. Because the jury heard it too. Rowdy again, whispering it to Verrill on the porch under the wire's reach like a man confessing to the dark. And Verrill answering with silence and then, "God forgive him, logistics. So the last night went like this. At dusk, Virgil Sheppard drove his wife and daughter and his son's dog out the section road to a neighbor's. For supper, the county would hear. And from the neighbors they went into a marshal's Suburban and were gone. At 10, Virgil came home alone and lit the house like a man home alone. Kitchen, bathroom, bedroom, blue TV flicker, and then he went out the back on his belly through the windbreak and lay up in the irrigation cut with his thermal and a phone line open to cash and no rifle. And I want you to sit with that fact, because his old service rifle was 40 feet away in the shed safe and he left it there. 61 confirmed reasons in his hands to end this at the fence line, and he left it because his son's last wish, which you have not heard yet but he had, was already law. At 1:55 a.m., a grain truck with its lights off came down the section road and stopped shy of the yard, and two figures got out, and thermal does not lie. One wide, one lean, Rowdy and Virgil, a deputy sheriff of Antler County, carrying a fuel can toward a sleeping family's house, and they made it exactly 11 steps past the mailbox before the night stood up around them. It was not Virgil who stood up. It was 12 federal agents and 8 state troopers who had been in position since midnight, because the wire had heard the porch whisper, and the ambush was never Virgil's to spring. That was the deal he had made with Cash and made with himself, and the yard filled with light, and Rowdy Bodine, holding a fuel can, looked into 11 muzzles and did the only honest thing he had done in years. He sat down in the gravel and started to cry. Virgil ran, made it 200 meters into the Milo, and was run down by a Malinois. And at that same hour, choreographed to the minute, doors were coming off their hinges across 3 counties: the auction office, the annex, Virgil's cruiser barn, Lamar's lake place, and Sheriff Lamar Bodine was taken at his own kitchen table in his undershirt, with the burn barrel behind his house still warm. Ledger ash on the grate, not knowing the FBI had imaged the annex server 9 days earlier, and Wyman, gray Stetson on the hook by the door, opened his home to the United States with the confused thunder of a king meeting weather that would not take his calls, and said the last free words of his life, "Do you have any idea whose house this is?" And the agent cuffing him, a farm kid from Minnesota, said the sentence half the county would repeat for a decade. "Yes, sir. It's the government's now." Virgil watched his brother-in-law arrested from 400 meters out, lying in dead grass beside a dry irrigation ditch, and what he felt was not what he had spent 5 weeks expecting to feel. He had imagined this moment as a target falling, the little grim quantum of done that follows a good shot. Instead, watching Rowdy Bodine weep into the gravel of the yard where Gabe had learned to ride a bike, Virgil felt the cold thing in the back of his skull go quiet for the first time since the driveway, and into the quiet came, of all the possible ghosts, his son's voice. From the last video, the one I have not told you about yet, saying what it said. And Virgil put his forehead down on his hands in the dirt of his own field and stayed that way for a while, and the thermal scope beside him recorded, to its indifferent little card, a warm human shape shaking in the grass, and any analyst reviewing it would have logged subject prone, possibly injured, and the analyst would have been correct. Now the ending, and Antler County's long, loud spring. The Bodine cases never went to trial, not the big ones, because the family that had spent 3 generations closing ranks came apart in federal custody in 9 weeks, in reverse order of guilt. Virgil went first. A deputy in a cell is a man with strong incentives, and he traded 30 years of double paperwork, the second scale ticket system, the ghost brands, the burn lists, and the worst thing, the county radio logs from the night Gabe died, edited by his own hand, 4 hours choreographed like a wedding. Then Lamar's own deputies, freed of him, began remembering things, and the state patrol found Hobie Seeley's brand committee files in the crawl space of Lamar's lake place, which Lamar had been too arrogant to burn, because evidence you keep is leverage on your own family, and that detail tells you everything about what the Bodines were at the end. 5 men holding knives under one table. Rowdy pled to second-degree murder for Gabe and to Seeley's killing both, allocuting in open court in a voice you could barely hear, and the courtroom heard how it had gone in the barn that Tuesday, the family asking Gabe for the footage, the boy, 16, standing in the alley between the stalls with his chin up, his father's chin, They all said it, saying, "No, sir. I sent it where you can't reach it, and when my dad gets home you're going to answer for Mr. Seeley." And Rowdy, who was drunk, and who the family had sent to be scary because being scary was his job in the machine, grabbing the boy, and the boy twisting loose, quick like his father, and the swing, one swing, a cheater bar off the chute gate, meant to frighten, landed wrong, and I will not write what one swing does. The court record holds it, and that is enough. And the roof after, Lamar's idea, Lamar's stagecraft, Wyman's blessing, we do it clean. Rowdy got life. He asked for it, his own lawyer objecting. And from allocution to sentence he never once looked at Virgil, but at the door, in chains, he stopped and said to the room, "Not to anyone, tell Joe the boy never begged, he was the best of all of us." And then he was gone to Terre Haute, and that sentence sits where mercy would go if there were room. Lamar drew 32 years, color of law, obstruction, accessory, racketeering, and the visual the county will never forget. Their sheriff of 29 years taking the perp walk down the courthouse steps he owned, past the bench with his name on the donor plaque. Wyman, 81 at sentencing, got 25, which the actuaries call life, and the Bodine livestock auction was forfeited to the United States, RICO, every pen and flag and loudspeaker. And here is the part of the story the county tells with its chest now. The government auctioned the auction, and a cooperative of 140 area ranchers, the same men and women the Bodines had skimmed for decades, bought it together and renamed it. And you should drive through Brayton some Saturday, because the chant still pours out of the loudspeakers every week at the Seeley Community Livestock Exchange. And the plaque by the ring gate is bronze, and it has 2 names on it, a brand inspector who would not stop asking, and a 16-year-old with a trail camera. Under this roof, honest wait, in memory of Hobart Seeley and Gabe Sheppard, who kept the record. Jolene pled to a single count of obstruction for the calendar, over the government's own objection. They had not wanted to charge her at all, but she stood up in court and insisted. I scrubbed it. I knew why I was scrubbing it somewhere in me. Write it down, and took her probation like a woman taking her first honest breath in years. She testifies now, at stock growers' meetings and 4-H banquets of all places, about what families owe the truth. She and Virgil did not survive as a marriage. Some ground doesn't come back after a quake. But they survived as something. 2 people raising Lottie in 2 houses 4 miles apart. And if you think that is a sad ending, you have never seen what usually grows where a family like the Bodines burns down. And Hobie Seeley went home. 600 people came. The brand committee retired his district number the way ball clubs retire jerseys, and his sister in Kearney, on her clearest afternoon that year, held the folded flag the inspectors gave her. There is no flag for brand men, so they had one made, and said, well, Hobie always did check everything twice, which leaves the video. The one Gabe made. It was on the SD card behind the battery door, filmed the night before he died. The boy's face lit by his desk lamp, Scout's ear in the bottom of the frame, and Virgil did not find the courage to play it until the night after the arrests, alone in the machine shed. And I am going to give it to you nearly whole, because everything this story means is in it. Dad, if you're watching this, something went wrong, and you came home and started looking, because you always look. So, first thing, I'm not scared. I figured out what they're doing at the yard, and I think they did something to Mr. Seeley, and tomorrow Grandpa wants to talk to me, and I'm going to tell him no, and probably that's it, honestly. They'll yell and Mom will cry, but just in case, I hid everything where only you would ever look, because you taught me that. Stand by for grid. And here the boy grins, 16, invincible, gone, and holds up to the camera, of all things on this earth, his father's old dummy round. The inert 7.62 cartridge Virgil had used for 2 decades of dry fire practice, and left home in a coffee can of odds and ends. And Gabe says, second thing, and Dad, this is the important one, so listen. I know what you do when you're mad. I've watched you not be mad my whole life, and I finally figured out how you do it. You wait. So if something happened, and you're out there in the shed deciding, I already know what you're deciding, and I'm telling you, as the guy it happened to, that's my vote. Don't shoot anybody, Dad, not for me. Waiting is the thing you do best in the whole world, so wait. Do it your way, the long way. 61 was enough. Let me be the reason it stays 61. And that, friends, is what his son knew. That is what froze a Marine Scout sniper solid at his own kitchen table. Not fear, not grief. His boy, reading him from beyond the grave like a range card, taking the shot off the table with a grin, and a dummy round 11 hours before dying with his chin up in his grandfather's barn. The cartridge sits on Virgil's windowsill now, in the little house 4 miles from Jolene's where Lottie keeps her boots and Scout has a bed he ignores. Virgil put his papers in at 25 years. He teaches a wildlife biology merit badge, imagine that, and every second and fourth Tuesday, out of habit older than his sorrow, he wakes at 2 in the morning and listens to his county being quiet and goes back to sleep. 61 confirmed kills. The 62nd confirmed something else. There's a headstone at Cedarvale, moved now, to Virgil's family plot 2 counties over. Nobody asked the Bodines, and under the name and the dates it says what the whole state knows by now. Gabe Sheppard. He kept the record. And on the morning of the auction's reopening, they found something small sitting on the bronze plaque by the ring gate, and the co-op left it there in a little glass box once they understood. And ranchers touch the box for luck now on sale days, and I hope you already know what it is. A single dummy round standing on its base. Waiting. So that's the story of Virgil Sheppard, and I've got to be honest with you, this one rearranged some furniture in my head. 61 confirmed kills, and the deadliest thing this man ever did was wait 5 weeks without blinking. Think about that. Everybody in that county was braced for a rifle. The Bodines had a plan for a rifle. What they did not have a plan for was a quiet man with a notebook treating their whole empire like a 1,000-yard shot, checking wind, logging Tuesdays, mailing memory cards, holding fire. Here's the lesson I keep chewing on. Rage is a muzzle flash. It feels like power, and it gives away your position, and it's over in a millisecond, and it usually hits the wrong thing. Patience is the round that's still in the air. And notice who actually beat the Bodines. Not one Avenger. A 16-year-old who kept records. A bookkeeper who kept copies for 30 years. A brand inspector who checked everything twice. A wife who finally told the truth about a calendar square. And a spotter who became the law without ever leaving the fight. Corruption feels like a fortress when you're standing under it. But a fortress is just a target package nobody's finished writing yet. And every quiet person keeping a record is a page of it. And that boy, man, Gabe figured out the hardest thing about his own father. That waiting was his superpower, not his trigger. And he used his last night on Earth to aim the man instead of the rifle. 61 was enough. If a 16-year-old can see that clearly, so can we. So keep your records, tell the truth while it's cheap, and if you've got a temper, learn what Virgil learned and Gabe already knew. The strongest thing you'll ever do with a loaded moment is not fire it. If this story got to you like it got to me, share it with somebody who needs the patience more than the anger, and I'll see you in the next one. This is Nathan. Take care of your people.